Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Sneha and today I'm going to share my favorite face brushes for 2019. So continuing off with my last video, which was focused more on eye brushes and we divided them into subcategories. Today we're going to focus all about face brushes. So it's going to be for foundation, concealer, powder, bronzer, contour, blush, highlighter, all of these. So let's get started. Now the first set of brushes are not necessarily for me personally, but these are brushes that I tend to use on my clients. So not everybody likes when you use hands for skincare application. So I do prefer flat brushes. So all of these live in my freelance kit and I use them for applying skincare onto my clients. So the first one is Sigma F60. So it looks like this, just a standard classic flat brush. Another recent one which I've purchased is a My Kitco brush. This is 0.1, which is meant for foundation, but I really like the density of this for applying skincare. I would say this is definitely more dense than the Sigma brush that I have. So I do prefer this. And then lastly, I have a Makeup Forever brush, which is probably my favorite to apply skincare. This is the 106 brush, and this is what it looks like. So these are the three brushes that I tend to prefer when it comes to applying skincare onto my clients. Next, when it comes to foundation, I generally base it off of the amount of surface area or skin on their face, on the client's face that is. So I have some brushes which are really small, relative to other brushes that people use, and some that are quite big. So first I'll discuss the brushes that I personally use on myself, and then we'll move on to the other brushes that I carry in my kit. So the first one, which you guys have seen me use a lot in foundation reviews, it's still one of my favorite brushes. This is the Sephora Pro Mini Flawless Airbrush brush. This is fantastic. It's a good size, not only to apply foundation all over, but also to get in right here. You can turn the brush on its side. This is the one I've used today, so that's why it's dirty. But I've really enjoyed the quality of the brush. It's just fantastic and a good size to buff in foundation. So that's number one. The next brush is when I want to really pat on the foundation, when I want more of a coverage instead of buffing action. This is the Charlotte Tilbury Hollywood Complexion brush. This is a double-ended one, but I do like the flat side. It's quite similar to the Sigma flat top brush, which I have somewhere, but a smaller size, which is why I love this. And it's again good to pat on foundation and also a nice size to go into the space between my brow and my hairline. So that's another brush that I would recommend. Another favorite of mine, and I have multiples of these, is by Zoeva. This is 110, I believe. Yes, this is the 110 face brush. It's called the Face Shape brush. Again, really small brush, but it's great for buffing in foundation all over the skin. Again, a nice size to go in those smaller areas, get around the corners of the nose and all of that. So beautiful brush if you have the time to really buff in foundation. So when I was recommending this, or when I was speaking that I tend to use this, Antariksha from YouTube recommended the bigger cousin of this brush, which is Zoeva 102. So I do have to thank her for this. This brush is brilliant. It's just a larger size of that one, which I already love. So when I'm in a rush or when I don't want to sit and buff in foundation for a long time, I tend to use this. This is 102 silk finish, if I haven't mentioned it before. Again, a good size for really covering larger areas quite quickly. But again, when you use it on this, you do have to turn it on its side, so you can't use the full size right there. So just be careful with that, but beautiful brush. And then something similar in terms of size is this brush by Bobbi Brown. This is their full coverage face brush. Really good brush, especially with foundations that are not on the thicker side. But you know, when you have these long-lasting formulas and they tend to be kind of sticky almost, and you don't have brushes which glide on quite easily with that kind of formula, this is the brush to go for. So I really have enjoyed using this brush. Now in my kit, I do carry the Zoeva brush, the small one, which is 110. And quite similar to that, but a different shape, is the Real Techniques contour brush. I carry multiples of these in my kit. And I think this is probably my primary brush, which I tend to use on most people to apply and buff foundation. Now, many of these brushes, especially the ones with the small heads, I also tend to use for cream blushes, cream bronzers, cream contouring, any of those products. So just keep that in mind. Two more brushes that I tend to use, again, not only for foundation, but also for cream products in general, are these two. This is by My Kitco. This is 0.21. Which is their My Flawless Face My Flawless Face Small brush, which looks like this. So it's quite similar to the Real Techniques one, just a bit smaller. And then this one, which is by Pack Cosmetics, the number is 263. Very inexpensive brush, but quite a nice size. Especially love this for applying cream blushes because I feel like it's because it's a larger size, just fits into the apple of the cheek, and then it's easy to buff out the edges with it. Next, moving on to concealing. So basically concealing under the eyes and setting it with powder. I tend to use these kind of brushes, mostly synthetic ones, and more of a blending brush. So this is the Real Techniques base shadow brush. And again, I tend to prefer smaller brushes. So anything that's good enough to get into the inner corner and also able to smudge or apply the concealer under the eye. So that's something I really enjoy. And this is by Pack Cosmetics, number 64. Again, it's a duofiber brush. Really nice again for applying concealer under the eye. And on myself, personally, I tend to use either the eyeshadow blending kind of brushes, so E25, MAC 217, that kind of style of brushes. Or recently I've discovered this beautiful brush by Laura Mercier. It's called the Eye Crease Brush, and it looks tiny, but I absolutely love it because it really fits into exactly where I want application. I'm not the person who likes to apply concealer all over my under eye area, so I'm very picky about where I want to apply concealer. So this is just perfect for it, and it's replaced the blending brushes for me. Now for brushes that I tend to use to set my under eye concealer are these kind of brushes. So I have the Real Techniques setting brush, which I personally love to set my under eyes with. And I also carry multiples of these in my freelance kit for that. Some other brushes that I love for setting the under eye. This is by Peaches and Cream, and the number is PC23. And this is what it looks like. Again, a nice flat-ish dense brush that's nice to pack on powder. And one of my favorites is MAC 240S. So it's a synthetic brush, but really good size and shape to apply powder under the eyes. I think that brush can be a really multi-use brush. So if you can get your hands on it, definitely try that. It's good for applying eyeshadows on a large area, or also good for applying face powder highlighters. Next, let's move on to highlighter brushes. I have two styles that I prefer depending on whether the formula is powder versus cream. So the first one are these two. So they look quite similar, just that they're by different brands. This is by Zoeva. This is 134 Luxe Powder Fusion Brush. As you can see, it's well loved and used. This is what I personally use for applying powder highlight to my cheekbones. And this is what I carry in my freelance kit. This is by Peaches and Cream. It's PC17. Quite similar in shape, nice to pick up a decent amount of powder highlight and just apply it to the areas that I need. Now, two brushes that I tend to use mostly with cream products, but one of them can work for cream and powder. So it's these two products. So the first one here is by Pack Cosmetics. The number is 131. So it's a nice shape right here, if you can tell. It has nice density as well to pick up cream products or liquid highlighters and apply it to the skin. And then this one, which I've recently picked up, this is the Linda Hallberg brush number 306. It's beautiful, very similar in shape to the Pack brush, which I've showed you before this. Slightly more fluffy at the top, but has still a really nice give to it that enables you to pick up not only powder, but also cream and liquid highlighters. And this is the brush I've used today. I've used not only the ColourPop Super Shock cream highlighter, but also powder highlighter on top, and this is the kind of finish I can get. Also applied it to the bridge of my nose, so if I look down, you can hopefully see that, and also on my Cupid's bow. So the brush, despite it looking so small, it's good. It has these different curves or edges. That's good to apply the highlighter to a smaller area. Next, moving on to brushes that I tend to use for bronzer and contour. The one that I personally use is the Wayne Goss brush number 14. As you can see, it's quite dirty because this is the brush I use on a daily basis to apply my bronzer. There's really not much to say about it. It's the perfect size, and it picks up a really light amount of bronzer, which is what I personally like. I don't like a lot of bronzer. I just use it basically to add more dimension and shape to my face. So I really enjoyed this brush for that. And then for my contour, I used to use a different Wayne Goss brush, but I've recently switched to the Smith Cosmetics brush. This is 112. It's a beautiful shape to apply contour to the face. So this is the brush I use for bronzer, and this one for contouring. And in my freelance kit, I carry different brushes depending on whether I'm using powder versus cream products or liquid products. So for powder, I generally prefer these kind of brushes. So I don't know, they're called probably paddle style brushes, I think. But this first one is by Kit Stars. It's the S3 blush brush. This is what it looks like. Quite fluffy and soft, really good for applying the either face powder or bronzer. Next one is Wayne Goss brush number 11. It's slightly denser than the Kit Star brush, but really good at picking up product. So again, a brush that I enjoy not just for powder, but also for bronzer. And then lastly, I have the London Brush Company. This is the brush number, I don't know, but I'll put it up on the screen if I can find it. Again, really soft, nice to apply powder and also bronzer. Now, when I have cream or like liquid bronzers that I want to use, or even contour products, I tend to use a few different brushes. These two you've seen already in the foundation brush. So it's the Real Techniques contour brush and the My Kit Co 0.21. I do tend to use, because of their pointy shape, to also apply bronzer or contour cream products. So I have multiples of those for sure. Then I also carry this Charles H. Fox brush and a really long number, which I'll put up on the screen. So it looks like this. It's quite stiff and dense. So it's really nice to pick up product and just place it where you really need it. And then lastly, I also tend to use the Wayne Goss brush number 10 to apply my cream products, so bronzer, contour, any of those products. And then lastly, to apply blush, again, depending on whether it's powder versus cream formula, I do have a few favorite brushes. The one I tend to use on a daily basis is really basic, and it's the Real Techniques blush brush. And as you can see, it's well used and loved. And I just use the tip of the brush to apply blush. I'm not a really big blush person, so this kind of works for me. I take a small amount and just tap on areas that I want color. But in my kit, I do carry a few different ones. So when it comes to powder blushes, I tend to use these three brushes depending on what blush I'm using. So certain blushes such as by NARS can be quite pigmented, so then I would use something really soft like the Wayne Goss brushes. Whereas some other brushes, which are quite light, I may need more color with them, so then I can go in with something like the NARS blush brush. So the first one here is Wayne Goss brush number 14, which is one of my favorite brushes for powder, blush, bronzer, anything in general. I love that brush. Another favorite brush is the Wayne Goss airbrush, I believe. Fantastic. So it picks up products so lightly. So anything too pigmented, this is fabulous to apply the blush with. Really, really good brush. I use this for, again, powder, blush, sometimes even bronzer. So it's a really nice one to have. And then lastly, we have the NARS blush brush. Again, I find this one to be slightly more, I don't want to say rough, but in comparison to the Wayne Goss brushes, I do think these are not as soft. So I tend to use this only when the other brushes are dirty. But again, it's a nice brush to pick up blush and apply it to the cheeks. So those are my three recommendations for powder blushes. And when it comes to cream blushes, I have one of my favorite brushes, which is Smith Cosmetics 157. Now this is the shape of the brush if I hold it on its side. So what I do is apply the blush on this surface and then tap on and then blend it into the cheek. So this is great for liquid blushes and cream blushes. So RCMA or the NARS liquid blushes, really love this brush. And the other one that I might use is by Cosette. This is S140. Again, it's a brush that I use for multiple purposes. It can go well for powder, so light dusting of powder all over the face, or for applying cream or powder blushes in general. And then lastly, as far as sponges are concerned, I love the Esom sponges. I believe these are called the Pro Finishing sponges. So you get a pack of 2, I believe, and this is one of them, which I've used, and it's amazing. The density in comparison to the typical beauty blender sponges, this one is more dense, but at the same time, I don't know, it just gives such a beautiful finish on the skin. I don't think I've touched any of my beauty blenders after I've purchased this sponge. I mean, generally I do prefer to use brushes, but some days I just want to use a sponge, and this is the one I gravitate towards. The surfaces and cuts on it is really good to not only apply foundation, but also do under eye concealing, or if you want to do pinpoint concealing, or even apply cream blush with this. I feel like it's a beautiful product, and I would highly recommend checking this one out. And that's it. That's all the face brushes that I would recommend, and some that I use personally. If you have any questions about any of these brushes, do leave it in the comment section below. But I hope you enjoyed watching this, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!